In order to initiate far-reaching measures, for example, in the European education sector, you need to know exactly what's going on. And of course, each member state naturally has completely different starting positions. So you need a lot of data about pupils, about students, and where they come from, what they learn, and why they maybe leave before finishing school or university. So what share of the adults maybe continues learning, or how the member states are dealing with migration. The Education and Training Monitor of the EU Commission provides all of these data, figures and facts, and is the European Commission's flagship publication on education. This year's edition, coincidentally, focuses on the challenge of digital education, and of course they asked also about digital skills of students and teachers. And you all know what the last 8 months happened to us, so the consideration of COVID-19 was not forgotten and shows the massive impact on digital learning. Of course, many in the audience will have questions. I want to mention that questions should be submitted on Twitter with the hashtag #ETMonitor. Questions coming through Twitter will be answered on Twitter during or after the session. And now we present the brand new numbers of the EU Education and Training Monitor. Maybe I can, so this is it. This is the Education Training Monitor 2020. We wait for the picture. And we see on screen already Themis Christophidou. She's the Director General at the Directorate for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture of the European Commission. She will soon be joined by additional colleagues from the European Commission. Over to you, Themis.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to present the 9th edition of the Education and Training Monitor. As many of you know, this is the flagship annual report. It has already been introduced like that, of the European Commission on the state of education and training in Europe. Now, you said coincidentally it focuses on digital. Well, it's not totally coincidental, because the need to focus on digital was there even before COVID. Now it just has become more urgent. So over the past decade, the monitor has informed us all on how EU member states' education systems perform and progress towards the common EU targets. We have witnessed how each of our member states is dealing with both national and shared challenges. In effect, the monitor has grown to be the European Union's main analytical tool for shaping evidence-based policymaking in education. This year, indeed, digital education and digital competence are the monitor's lead theme. As Commissioner Gabriel underlined yesterday, this choice could not be more appropriate given our present circumstances. And I'm proud to see today how valuable it has become that at European level, we have worked with foresight to address this issue ahead of time, gathering evidence to act swiftly and surely. The current COVID-induced school and university closures have been a tough stress test for education systems. Schools had to move to distance learning in a matter of days. We know that this caused serious disruption in the learning process, with large differences in terms of quality and in terms of access. Not surprisingly, children from disadvantaged backgrounds were the ones impacted the most due to lack of broadband connectivity, due to lack of digital devices, or a supportive home environment. Although each member state is doing its utmost to keep schools open under the second wave of the pandemic, that has not been possible everywhere, with some areas having to close down their schools. This may further aggravate existing inequalities, but we're working hard to address this so that consequences do not impact our society for decades to come. The pandemic has demonstrated the importance of stepping up the readiness of digital solutions for teaching and learning in Europe. It has also pointed to where these systems' most salient weaknesses lie. The digital infrastructure of schools has developed significantly in the past decade, yet large disparities persist in many countries. The share of students attending highly equipped and connected schools is highest in the Nordic countries. At European level, it ranges from 35% for primary education to 72% in upper secondary education. However, only 8% of learners in rural areas attend schools with high-speed internet. On top of this, many teachers were not prepared to use digital technologies in the classroom. On average in the EU, fewer than half of the teachers report that ICT was included in their formal education or training. Distance learning has meant a steep learning curve for so many of the teachers who were less fluent in the use of information technology in their teaching practices. We have also found solid evidence that, contrary to the commonly held belief that today's young people are a generation of digital natives, young people do not develop sophisticated digital skills just by growing up using digital devices. This is what emerges from the ICILS test, the International Computer and Information Literacy Study, conducted every 5 years since 2013 among 14-year-old pupils in selected EU member states. Digital underachievement, that is, a failure to perform even the most basic ICT operations, is quite overspread in the EU. In some member states, it can be found among as many as a third or even half of all 14-year-old pupils tested. This is why the Commission has formally proposed a European target to reduce digital underachievement below 15% by 2025. This clear target should help countries spur into action. This crisis, ladies and gentlemen, started as disruption, but as our response grows from reaction to thought-out, evidence-based action, this crisis should lead to innovation. We should convert this crisis into new opportunities to equip learners, teachers, schools, universities with effective pedagogies that embrace technology. Measures taken during the pandemic have already opened up new opportunities to improve the delivery of education in rural areas, raising hopes of bridging the gap between them and urban areas. To help member states address this issue, and more broadly, to increase digital literacy in Europe, we have presented the new Digital Education Action Plan 2021-2027. We want to improve digital infrastructure and connectivity, but also to make teachers more digitally competent and confident. The plan will help provide education and training staff with high quality learning content, with user-friendly tools and secure platforms that respect privacy and ethical standards. Of course, these ambitions need to be backed with appropriate resources. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is endowed with a budget of 560 billion euros. React EU represents an additional 55 billion euros. Both instruments can be mobilized to support digital education in the context of our recovery. These EU funds can become a real game changer. To make sure we get our priorities right, The monitor will continue to provide up-to-date evidence of education in Europe. But there is something else that makes this year's monitor particularly relevant. This is the last edition measuring progress against the objectives set 10 years ago within the EU's cooperation framework for education and training. We have scored some reassuring successes in reducing early leavers from education and training, nearly reaching the target of 10%. We have also raised tertiary educational attainment to 40%, which was the target. And we have extended the participation in early school childhood education and care to 95%. Still, we have work to do, reducing underachievement in basic skills to less than 15%. Here we made little progress over the past decade. The underachievement rate stood around 23% in 2018, the year of the latest PISA test, in all subjects measured. This is something to seriously consider and analyze. Europe faces a persistent challenge with more than 1/5 of 15-year-olds underperforming in basic skills. This bodes ill for their chances in professional and private life. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is no time for complacency. As you will see in the presentation that will follow, we need to support member states further to reach the common targets that we have set out to achieve in the EU education policy. In September, we announced our communication in achieving the European education area by 2025. The European education area is rooted in decades of education cooperation at the EU level. It is rooted in the trust and mutual understanding that the strategic framework for European cooperation in education and training, ET 2020 Monitor, has helped build this past decade. I strongly believe that through this, we can further enrich the quality, the inclusiveness, and digital and green dimension of member state education systems. I want to thank you for your attention and to leave the floor to my colleagues for a more detailed overview of these results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Themis. And as you mentioned, now we will go to Bartek Lesser, a policy analyst at the European Commission who coordinates the Education and Training Monitor. So it's your turn.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And I should start with a statement like this. What would you say if I told you that 50% of 14-year-old students in Luxembourg in 2018 are rated underperforming on very basic digital skills? It's a shocking truth, right? So now, luckily, we have a fairly new tool, an emerging tool to measure these things and to learn more about what young people can do with computers, what they can't do, and what their true digital competence is. If you could launch the slide. Yeah, next slide, please. So, as the Commissioner and Themis said, we chose to focus on digital skills in this year's monitor because we have an ongoing action plan to boost digital skills, but also because the school closures, this topic that we had chosen earlier, has proven to be particularly timely because we had to step up the measures for distance learning and teaching in a very short span of time. So next slide, please. What we know about what 14-year-olds can do with computers is based on a study that started in 2013. It was repeated 5 years later. It's called ICILS. It's run by an international organization called IEA based in Amsterdam and Hamburg. that has 60 years of experience in measuring educational performance. It's an emerging study because not all member states have participated, yet with 60,000 pupils and 35,000 teachers and 3,300 schools participating back in 2013 and a similar number participating in 2018, this study offers important policy pointers. So the next slide, please. If we look at these countries and their scores in 2013 and 18, we look that considerable numbers, up to 50% in Luxembourg, fail in the simplest tasks with computers. And this is something we have to come to grips with. And this is why the Commission has proposed a digital underperformance indicator and a target for the next 5 years for this number to be kept below 15%. Next slide, please. So it's important to look at what factors influence the scores. So we know from the study, from its extremely rich background questionnaire, that parental job status and what educational attainment parents have, and items like the number of books and other cultural and knowledge resources at home are correlated with the final scores in the test. Unfortunately, migrant background or being born outside the country of testing is also, to a certain degree, a predictor of performance. Also, a different language spoken at home is associated with lower scores. Next slide, please. Moving on to the core of monitors analysis, which is the indicators of this long-term strategy that Europe set up for itself back in 2009 for the decade that is just drawing to a close. And this is the time to look what has worked in that strategy and what targets have been achieved. Next slide, please. So the crucial headline target in that strategy was to drive down the percentage of pupils who end their education without a secondary degree and are between 18 and 24 of age, and they've terminated their studies and they don't hold a secondary degree. So that number went down over the past decade of policy efforts from 14 to 10.2%. So we consider that target to actually be reached, which is a great source of joy. However, that joy is mitigated by the fact that different member states stand very differently on the target. These are overall EU scores. And secondly, for example, the foreign-born have a much higher rate of early leaving, as high as 22.2, compared with the native-born pupils. Native-born young people, and that number stands at 8.9. I will now ask my colleague Alexandra to step in and fill you on some country details. Alexandra, please.
Mm-hmm. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Alexandra Tamasan. I follow education developments in Bulgaria and Romania, and today I want to talk to you about a country where early school leaving is still high, but where a lot of promising measures have been taken recently to address this challenge. So this country is Bulgaria. As you can, next slide, please. As you can see, a slide, please. Voila. So as you can see on the slide in front of you, Bulgaria has one of the highest shares of early leavers from education and training in the EU. This is a challenge particularly in rural areas and among disadvantaged students, including the Roma. But as I have said in the beginning of my intervention, a lot of measures have been taken recently. So what does that mean concretely? To start with, the so-called mechanism for interinstitutional cooperation has been put in place. The idea behind this is not just to improve the exchange of data between the institutions involved in fighting early school leaving, but also to strengthen their cooperation. So in practice, teams, so-called multidisciplinary teams were set up, comprising teachers, school counselors, Roma mediators, and other specialists that went to the houses of children who were supposed to be in school but who are not, either because they had dropped out or because they had emigrated, with the clear objective of bringing these children back to schools. These teams still exist, but the focus is now on providing these children with support, and not only them, but also other students who are at risk of dropping out. This is done through the EU-funded project Support for Success. So students receive individualized support to overcome learning gaps in various subjects, including in Bulgarian language. But students also take part in extracurricular activities that are aimed to increase their motivation and engagement with the school. At the same time, we are seeing an increased focus on early childhood education and care policies. And we know from a lot of studies that these kind of policies and these kind of investments are perhaps the most effective ones in preventing early school leaving. So as of this autumn, the age of the compulsory preschool program has been lowered from 5 to 4, while the EU-funded project Active Inclusion in Preschool Education continues to support children from disadvantaged background in accessing quality education. Now, we are not yet seeing the results of these measures. They're partly because of the way in which we measure early school leaving among those aged 18 to 24, partly also because in education it takes time to see the results. The important thing is that these measures continue and that they are further reinforced, because early school leaving is still a significant challenge. And it is very important that these measures continue, especially in the current context of COVID, a crisis that risks to worsen the already high inequalities in education and to impact particularly students who are at risk of dropping out. Thank you. Over to you, Bartek.
Thank you, Alexandra. So next slide, please. I would like now to move over to the next target, which is the element of the headline target of EG 2020 strategy, where Europe clearly has achieved a lot of success. And this is about raising the tertiary educational attainment of people aged 30 to 34. And Europe overall jumped from 31.1 back in 2009 up to just over 40% in 2019, the latest year for which the data is available. These are overall figures for the entire EU. If you break it down to countries, that picture is more differentiated, which leaves a lot of room for improvement in the next strategy period. But also, it's important to see that we have a reverse gender gap here. It's women who now study more and get degrees more often and reach the tertiary education level. As many as 45.6% women in that age bracket are holders of a tertiary degree, which is a source of a great contentment for policymakers. However, men are now lagging behind with 35.1%. There is a minor difference between the foreign and the native born, but it's not so striking as on some of the other indicators. Next slide, please. This is another occasion where I'd ask a colleague, so Antonio, could you give us some examples here?
Thanks, Bartek. Good morning. We have chosen Finland to illustrate the situation in higher education. Why is Finland? Because we consider one of the best performance at EU level in tertiary education attainment in terms of access and equity and in quality and efficiency. Tertiary education attainment is above EU average, and an important share of vocational students enroll in applied university studies. In Finland, the strategic vision for higher education and research 2030, which is being implemented, aims to increase access to higher education and reach the target of 50% of the total young adult population, age 25-34, with a tertiary degree. Besides, employment rates of the recent tertiary graduates are much above EU average and has one of the lowest skill mismatches. The strategic vision also has the objective of higher education playing a major role in adult learning, upskilling, reskilling of the workforce through flexible pathways and continuous learning opportunities. One of the reasons for the excellent performance is the existence of a performance-based funding model for university in place since 20 years ago. In Finland, allocation of core funding to university is output-based and takes into account the impact and scope of operation, as well as other targets of education and R&D policies. The regional impact and link with businesses and industry and the teaching quality and internationalization are also taken into account. To that aim, a strategic funding formula is agreed every 4 years. The funding system allows universities to orient better their educational strategy to have a major impact on the regional and national societal and economic challenges, and to have further labor market relevance, facilitating at the same time that their graduates find jobs that matches their qualification. In 2019, Finland agreed a reform of the 2017 funding model for 21 and 24 period. The new model was prepared in a collaborative way by the Ministry of Education and Culture, higher education institution, staff, students, and other stakeholders. The new funding formula increased the funding proportion based on the number of employed graduates and the quality of their employment, which requires graduate tracking mechanism in place. Although there is no formal evaluation of the performance-based model, the stakeholders seem to be in favor to this approach, and quality and efficiency gains can be observed. For instance, in the last 10 years, employment rate of recent tertiary graduates increased from 85 to 89%, and skill mismatches in STEM field, science, technology, and engineering and mathematics, reduced it from 45 to 35. Thanks so much. Back to you, Bartek.
Great, thanks, Antonio. Now I would like to, on the next slide, please, I would like to show you that Europe has scored another success on raising the percentage of young children in their attendance of early childhood education. We're looking here at the age group of children between 4 years and the age where they start the compulsory education. And that level was already high back in 2009 with 90.3%, but it has risen in line with the target up to 94.8 in 2018, the latest available data year, which brings us to the target within the statistical era. So now if we look forward with this target reached, we would like to continue our efforts improving accessibility of early childhood education facilities, its affordability for families, and also by including younger children from the age of 3. Please flip to the next slide. And here is a moment where I have to convey some bad news. It's about the PISA study, which is the source of information for us how 15-year-olds score on reading, maths, and science. And with the performance thresholds that we have established, we know how many of those 15-year-olds fail a very basic level, which we call underperformance, which is the entry to adult life, to independent life, to having a career, and to leading being a successful citizenship. So roughly a fifth of EU's 15-year-olds failed that important threshold, and they've been failing it for the last 10 years. And the unfortunate fact that we have established is that there hasn't been any major improvement in this over, well, the past decade since the strategy began. Interestingly, also, there is a persistent gap between the foreign-born students and the students coming from poor households. So the social background is consistent with poor performance. On that note, I would like to show you on the next slide, that these EU averages mask enormous differences between EU member states. On the left, 4 member states with Estonia, Ireland, Finland, and Poland have reached the 15% underachievement target, while all others on the right have not. This is a source of worry, and this is a reason why we have to double our policy efforts. I would like to ask my colleague Attila to give you a country example here. Attila? Yeah. Okay, Alexandra, I will let you step in then.
Alexandra, if you can hear me, please turn off your mute function maybe.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
So I was saying that unfortunately, our colleague who deals with Estonia is having some technical difficulties and couldn't connect. But as he's back up, I'm very happy to say a few things about Estonia. You can see from the chart in front of you that Estonia is one of the best countries in the EU when it comes to equipping young people with basic skills. In fact, Estonia is not only one of the best in the EU, but also one of the best countries in the world when it comes to basic skills, combining excellence in excellence with a high level of equity. So what does that mean? It means that when we look at the percentage of students who demonstrate advanced knowledge in the 3 areas of tested in PISA, math, science, and reading, their share is one of the highest in the EU. But most importantly, when we look at the students who do not have a basic level in these 3 subjects, this share is one of the lowest in the EU, and this is also the case of disadvantaged students. So what is behind the success of the Estonian model? Well, to start with, education is highly valued in Estonian society. There have been continuous efforts to modernize the education system and to put in place policies to make sure that no learner is left behind. School teachers and school leaders enjoy a lot of autonomy in planning their lessons and organizing teaching. Estonia has also been quite successful in implementing EU funds to modernize its education system. But one of the other factors, which is probably one of the most important one, is the quality of teachers and the quality of teaching. Now, this is not to say that the Estonian education system is perfect. Of course, it has its own challenges, but when it comes to basic skills, it is one of the best in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. On the next slide, please, I would like to, next still. Yes. So here we have the last indicator of the 10-year strategy that is finishing now that I wanted to show you. It's about adult learning. It's about continued learning. It's about learning of people who already have a career and work. And the EU's ambition was to reach 15% of those who take part in continued training. And that adult learning, we look at the age bracket of productive age population, which is 25 here to 64. And we have a problem here because on two levels. First, the overall level hasn't been reached. Europe only slightly managed to improve from 7.9 to 10.8 over 10 years. And has remained far from 15%. But more interestingly, there is a social gradient here. So those who are already educated and have high level of qualification, they are much more likely to learn further. Those who have low qualifications are much less likely. Only 4.3% of those with low qualifications, only basic education, do participate in adult learning. And I would like to finish now the next slide, which is a view into what Europe has set for itself for the next strategy period. And the first indicator, which is here called the upper secondary completion, is an adapted, a slightly modified indicator of early school leavers. We changed the age bracket, we raised it up to 20, and we reversed, we flipped over the indicator. It's now about upper secondary completion, and Europe's ambition is to have 90% of people aged 20 to 24 with a secondary degree. Secondly, the tertiary educational attainment, the indicator hasn't changed, but the target has been risen from 40 to 50%. In early childhood education, we want younger children from the age of 3 to participate in schooling, and we want 98%, not 95, but 98% of them. In basic skills, as measured by the PISA study, we haven't changed anything. Both the indicator and the target have stayed the same because we haven't achieved them. So this is an ongoing ambition. And lastly, we now want to introduce a digital competence target. Again, we want to keep underperformance in digital competence below 15%. So these are Europe's ambitions for the next strategy period. I thank you very much for your time. And I would like to hand over to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Bartek. Thank you as well, Antonio and Alexandra, for the partially surprising results of the Education and Training Monitor 2020. And now I've prepared a few questions that I would now like to ask our policy experts. And for all our viewers, don't forget to use the hashtag #ETMonitor if you have questions of your own. So first question is, how can it be that pupils lack basic digital skills, given that they are digital natives and often use digital tools much more than their parents?
Can I respond to that question? Because I have an idea here.
Yeah, just go on, Bartek.
Well, I think we should start that evidence that young people are digital natives is merely anecdotal. So we don't have any hard facts to corroborate that statement. Further, the heavy use of computers every day does not necessarily translate into a purposeful use of computers for education, for personal development. We know, particularly from the ISIL study, that a lot of time that kids spend on ICT is on gaming, social media, and areas which are more leisure activities than education. So digital skills have to be taught like anything else, like math, science, and literature. Digital skills are something that you acquire through a painful process of repetition and knowledge transfer, exchange. It's not something that you absorb through the pores of your skin. So I would finish with that.
Yes, yeah, that what you were talking about in our previous panel. Bartek, is there any change in the way member states respond to the second wave of the pandemic in terms of education as compared to the first one? So what lessons have been learned?
Maybe any of the colleagues?
Well, I don't really know if they are still online, so I don't. So there are no. They turned off their camera, so I think that there are.
Right. No, here, you know, it's a quantitative or a quantum leap that we have now. I mean, the level of resources mobilized and that are being poured into distance learning is much higher because, I mean, some say that the distance learning back in March was a challenge, was one of those black swans events for which we hadn't rehearsed, but we have been rehearsing now for 6 months. So the first shock is over. Now we know that you know what tools have to be used by teachers. We know how to keep kids engaged, how to track their presence, and all countries in Europe have mobilized enormous financial and technical resources that they offered at their disposal to schools and children. So we are getting better at it.
Bartek, thank you very much for answering the questions, and thank you also very much for your presentation and the analysis of the results. Greetings and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.